$10 million in unmarked bills sat on a mahogany desk in Chicago, offered with a single bizarre condition: break the city's most resilient chef. Men of violence assumed tears would fall easily. They never suspected the bounty was a meticulously designed snare to slaughter them all. In the high-stakes, hyper-masculine world of Chicago's elite culinary scene, Penelope Hayes was an anomaly. She was the executive chef at Lumina, a fiercely exclusive restaurant nestled in the affluent Gold Coast neighborhood. Penelope was brilliantly talented, famously curvy, and possessed a spine forged from absolute titanium. In an industry known for screaming chefs and shattered plates, she was an iceberg. Nothing rattled her. Not brutal hours, not the vicious food critics, and certainly not the dangerous clientele that frequented Lumina's velvet-draped private dining rooms. The restaurant was a known neutral ground for the Costello Syndicate, the most powerful and heavily armed organized crime family in the Midwest. At the head of this empire sat Vincent Costello. Vincent was 34, impeccably tailored, and possessed a reputation so deeply soaked in violence that his mere presence in a room caused the air pressure to drop. The bizarre saga began on a freezing Tuesday in November. Word spread through the encrypted channels of the dark web and the hushed whispers of underground poker games at the Wellington Club. Vincent Costello had issued a bounty. It wasn't a contract for a hit. It wasn't a demand for territory. It was a psychological challenge that baffled the criminal underworld. Vincent was offering $10 million in untraceable bearer bonds to any man who could make Penelope Hayes cry. The rules, dictated by Vincent's terrifying underboss, Dominic Russo, were oddly specific. 1. Penelope could not be physically harmed. No broken bones, no physical assault, no kidnapping. 2. The tears had to be genuine, born of profound emotional devastation or psychological breaking. 3. The act had to be verifiable. The rumor mill instantly exploded with theories. Why would the most dangerous man in Chicago care about breaking a chef? The prevailing gossip was that Penelope had deeply insulted Vincent. The story went that during a private sit-down with the rival Romano family, Vincent had ordered his steak well done with a side of ketchup, a deliberate power play to show he didn't care about elite etiquette. Penelope had supposedly marched out of the kitchen, taken the plate from the table, and thrown it into the garbage, telling the Mafia Boss to eat at a drive-thru if you want garbage. The underworld laughed. They assumed Vincent's bruised ego demanded a theatrical punishment. He wanted to see the arrogant, curvy chef stripped of her pride, reduced to a weeping mess, and he was willing to pay a fortune to outsource the humiliation. Greed is a powerful motivator, and $10 million was enough to tempt the most ruthless psychological predators in the city. They saw Penelope as soft target. She wasn't a hardened criminal. She was just a woman who baked soufflés and managed a kitchen. Breaking her spirit seemed like child's play to men who made a living extorting politicians and breaking kneecaps. What the syndicates didn't know, what nobody in Chicago knew, was that the rumor of the steak incident was completely fabricated. Vincent Costello had never been insulted by Penelope Hayes. In fact, they hadn't spoken more than 3 words to each other in public. The bounty was a trap. For 6 months, Vincent had been dealing with a massive internal leak. Someone within his inner circle, or a closely allied faction, was feeding information to the FBI and planning a coup to assassinate him. Vincent's paranoia was at an all-time high, but he couldn't flush the rats out of the shadows. He needed bait. He knew that the traitors in his organization were greedy, sadistic, and desperate for cash to fund their quiet rebellion. He also knew something else, a secret he guarded more fiercely than his offshore bank accounts. He was entirely, irrevocably, obsessed with Penelope Hayes. He had watched her for a year. He admired her command of the kitchen, the way she moved, her fierce independence, and the curves she proudly carried in a world obsessed with waifs. Penelope was his singular vulnerability, a weakness he hadn't yet claimed out of fear of painting a target on her back. But Vincent was a tactician. He realized that the best way to uncover the men trying to destroy him was to offer them a massive payday disguised as a petty vendetta. By making Penelope the target of a psychological game, he was forcing the greediest, most ambitious snakes in the underworld to step into the light. He knew they would flock to Lumina to try and break her, and when they did, Vincent would be watching exactly who stepped up to the plate. The kitchen at Lumina was a symphony of controlled chaos, and Penelope was its conductor. But less than 48 hours after the bounty was posted, the atmosphere shifted. The restaurant became a hunting ground. The first to try his luck was Tommy the Weasel Lombardi, a mid-level loan shark known for his vicious debt collection tactics. Tommy bypassed the hostess and swaggered into the kitchen during the Friday night rush. He cornered Penelope by the prep station, flashing a menacing smile. He had done his homework, digging up the fact that Penelope had taken out a massive, high-interest loan 5 years prior to pay for her mother's terminal cancer treatments, a debt she was still meticulously paying off. "Beautiful kitchen, Penny," Tommy sneered, leaning over the stainless steel counter, deliberately knocking over a container of imported saffron. "Shame it's built on a mountain of debt. I bought your paper this morning. You owe me now, and I'm calling the whole note due by midnight, or I'm taking this restaurant, your house, and throwing you on the street with nothing but the apron on your back." He expected panic. He expected her eyes to well up with the realization of total financial ruin. The $10 million was practically in his pocket. Penelope calmly picked up a damp microfiber cloth, wiped the spilled saffron into a waste bin, and turned to look Tommy dead in the eye. "Tommy, is it?" she asked, her voice dangerously calm. "My mother died in agony, but she died knowing I fought for her. You think a piece of paper scares me? You think financial ruin scares a woman who spent 3 years sleeping on a flour sack in Paris just to learn how to temper chocolate? Keep the house, take the debt. I can cook anywhere in the world, but you will always be a bottom-feeding parasite in a cheap polyester suit. Now get out of my kitchen before I accidentally mistake your hand for a prime rib." Tommy stood paralyzed. There were no tears, only a blistering, absolute contempt that made him take a step back. He cursed, turned on his heel, and stormed out. From a private booth in the back of the restaurant, shielded by a tinted glass partition, Vincent Costello watched the exchange on a closed-circuit tablet. Beside him, Dominic poured a glass of Barolo. "Tommy Lombardi," Vincent murmured, pulling a silver pen from his pocket and crossing a name off a leather-bound ledger. "He has the funds to buy her debt, which means he's skimming from the South Side docks. Have him dealt with tonight." "Consider it done, boss," Dominic replied. "She's tough. You really think this is going to work?" "The small fish will try to intimidate her," Vincent said, his eyes glued to the screen as Penelope effortlessly returned to searing scallops. "But the real traitors, the ones with ambition, will try to destroy her mind. We just have to wait." The psychological warfare escalated over the next 2 weeks. Penelope's life became a gauntlet of calculated sabotage. A high-profile food critic, secretly on the payroll of the Romano family, published a scathing, career-destroying review of Lumina, calling Penelope's signature dishes the desperate flailings of an overweight amateur. Penelope read the review aloud to her kitchen staff, laughed until she was breathless, and framed the article by the expo line as a joke. No tears. Then came the emotional manipulation. Arthur Pendleton, the charming, aristocratic sommelier at Lumina, whom Penelope had quietly dated for 2 months, abruptly dumped her in the middle of a shift. He loudly proclaimed in front of the entire staff that he had only been using her, calling her repulsive and unlovable. Arthur thought he had the $10 million prize secured. He thought breaking a woman's heart was the easiest path to tears. Penelope stood frozen for exactly 4 seconds. The kitchen staff went dead silent, expecting the breakdown. Instead, Penelope picked up a perfectly sharp chef's knife, pointed it at Arthur's chest, and smiled coldly. "I always knew your taste in wine was better than your taste in women, Arthur. Pack your knives. You're fired." She didn't shed a single tear, though her chest ached with the betrayal. She channeled the fury into a flawless dinner service. Upstairs in the security room, Vincent's jaw was clenched so tight his teeth threatened to crack. Watching Arthur humiliate Penelope made a murderous rage flare in his chest. He added Arthur to the ledger. By 3 a.m., Arthur Pendleton was locked in the trunk of a Lincoln town car headed for the bottom of Lake Michigan. The trap was working flawlessly. The $10 million bounty was acting as a flawless filter, drawing out every rat, opportunist, and traitor hiding in Chicago's shadows. Vincent was systematically dismantling the internal threat to his empire, one failed psychological torturer at a time. But the game was taking a toll on Penelope. The constant barrage of hostility, the sudden betrayals, the dark energy surrounding her restaurant. It was heavy. She wasn't made of stone, even if she refused to let these monsters see her bleed. She began staying at the restaurant until 4 a.m., exhausting herself with inventory, just to avoid going home to an empty apartment where the silence might finally let the tears fall. Then, on a rainy Thursday night, the game changed. The kitchen was empty. The staff had gone home. Penelope was sitting on a milk crate in the walk-in freezer, letting the freezing air numb her exhaustion. The heavy steel door creaked open, and a towering figure stepped into the frigid light. It was Leo the Viper Rossi. Leo was Vincent's cousin, a charming, psychopathic lieutenant who had always harbored ambitions of taking over the syndicate. Leo wasn't stupid like the others. He knew that intimidation and petty heartbreak wouldn't break Penelope Hayes. To break a woman of titanium, you had to melt her reality. "Hello, Penelope," Leo said softly, his breath pluming in the freezing air. Penelope didn't flinch. "Kitchen's closed, Leo. Whatever you're here to say, save it. I'm not crying for your little mobster bet." Leo chuckled, pulling a thick manila folder from his tailored coat. "Oh, I know you're not. You're strong. So incredibly strong. But strength is just ignorance wrapped in armor, Penny. You think you're fighting off a bunch of greedy thugs trying to win $10 million because you insulted Vincent?" Penelope narrowed her eyes. "That's the rumor." "It's a lie," Leo whispered, stepping closer, tossing the folder onto a crate of frozen lobsters. "Vincent never hated you. Quite the opposite. Do you know why all these men are coming after you? Why your life has been a living hell for the past 3 weeks?" Penelope stared at the folder, her heart suddenly beating a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "Open it," Leo commanded gently. Penelope reached out with trembling, flour-dusted fingers. She opened the file. Inside were dozens of high-resolution surveillance photographs. Pictures of her walking home. Pictures of her grocery shopping. Pictures of her sleeping through her second-story bedroom window. And at the bottom of each photograph, authorized by a familiar, sprawling signature, were the initials VC. "Vincent has been stalking you for a year," Leo said, his voice dripping with venomous sympathy. "He didn't put a bounty on you because he hates you. He put a bounty on you because you're his twisted little obsession. He used you as bait." He offered $10 million to see which of his enemies would come after the woman he secretly wants. Penelope stared at the photos, the chilling reality of the invasion of privacy washing over her. He used your pain, your safety, and your sanity as a mouse-trap, Leo sneered. You aren't a person to him, Penelope. You're just a piece of cheese on a board. He sat back and watched men try to destroy you, just so he could cross names off a list. For the first time in her life, the titanium cracked. The sheer violation, the realization that her suffering was orchestrated by a man silently watching from the shadows, was too much. Her chest hitched. A single heavy tear escaped her lash line and traced a hot path down her cheek. Leo smiled, pulling a sleek silver cell phone from his pocket to record the prize-winning tear. But before he could hit record, the heavy steel door of the walk-in freezer slammed shut behind him, locking with a definitive, echoing clack. From the shadows behind the towering racks of hanging meat, a voice as cold as the freezing air resonated through the room. You always were too smart for your own good, Leo. Vincent Costello stepped into the light, a silenced Beretta gripped loosely in his right hand. The final trap had just been sprung. The heavy silence of the walk-in freezer was shattered by the soft, deadly thwip of a suppressed gunshot. Leo Rossi didn't even have time to scream. The silver cell phone shattered in his hand, taking 2 of his fingers with it as the 9mm hollow point obliterated the device. He collapsed against a rack of hanging beef, clutching his bleeding hand, his charming, psychopathic demeanor instantly replaced by wide-eyed terror. Vincent Costello stepped fully into the harsh, fluorescent light of the freezer. He didn't look like a man who had just shot his own flesh and blood. He looked bored, though the muscle jumping in his jaw told a different story. He lowered the Beretta, keeping it aimed directly at his cousin's chest. "Did you really think I wouldn't know, Leo?" Vincent's voice was barely a whisper, yet it carried over the loud hum of the refrigeration units. "Did you honestly believe you could funnel my shipment schedules to the feds, plot a hostile takeover with the Romano family, and I would just sit blindly in my penthouse? You always were arrogant." Penelope stood frozen, her back pressed against the frozen stainless steel wall, her breath catching in her throat. The single tear that had escaped her eye was now freezing against her cheek, but the sadness had instantly vaporized, replaced by a massive spike of adrenaline. "Vince, wait!" Leo choked out, slipping on the frost-covered floor as his blood dripped onto the pristine white tiles. "It was just business. The families, they wanted you out. You've gone soft. You're obsessed with a cook." "She is an executive chef," Vincent corrected, his tone ice-cold. He pulled a heavy, encrypted walkie-talkie from his coat pocket and pressed the transmit button. "Dominic, the freezer. Bring the heavy bags." He tossed the radio aside and stepped closer to Leo. "You were the last rat, Leo. The one hiding in the walls, too scared to step into the traps I laid for the others. But I knew you couldn't resist the grand finale. I knew you couldn't resist trying to take the one thing you thought I cared about and breaking it in front of me." The heavy steel door swung open again. Dominic Russo stepped in, flanked by 2 massive men in dark suits carrying heavy-duty industrial trash bags and zip ties. Dominic didn't bat an eye at the blood on the floor. "Get him out of my sight," Vincent ordered without looking away from Leo. "Take him to the warehouse on the south side docks. We'll have a long family chat before the sun comes up." Leo began to beg, his bravado entirely broken, but Dominic and his men descended on him with ruthless efficiency. They bound his arms, gagged him with a roll of medical gauze, and dragged him out of the freezer. The heavy door closed with a definitive thud, leaving Vincent and Penelope entirely alone in the freezing, blood-stained room. Vincent finally turned his dark, intense gaze toward Penelope. The cold, calculating Mafia Don vanished, replaced by a man looking incredibly vulnerable. He slowly holstered his weapon, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. "Penelope, don't!" she snapped. The titanium in her spine had refused. She pushed herself away from the wall, her eyes blazing with a fury that rivaled the heat of her industrial ovens. She pointed a trembling finger at the manila folder scattered across the frozen lobsters. "Is it true? Did you orchestrate this entire sick circus? The $10 million? The thugs in my kitchen? The stalker photos?" Vincent didn't flinch, but his eyes softened. The bounty was real. The thugs were real. But the pictures... Leo didn't tell you the whole truth, because Leo didn't know the whole truth. He stepped closer, moving slowly so as not to spook her. "Look closer at those photographs, Penelope. Look at the timestamps. Look at the angles." Penelope hesitated, then snatched a handful of the glossy photos from the crate. She forced her eyes to focus on the details she had missed in her initial shock. Photo 1. She was walking home in the rain, but in the blurred foreground, a man in a black hoodie with a crowbar was stalking her from the alleyway. Photo 2. Her bedroom window. A reflection in the glass showed a sniper scope glinting from the adjacent apartment building. Photo 3. Grocery shopping. A black sedan was idling dangerously close to the crosswalk she was approaching, its license plate belonging to a known Romano hitman. "Those aren't stalker photos," Vincent said quietly, closing the distance between them until he was close enough that she could smell the expensive cedar and smoke of his cologne. "They are proof of life. They are surveillance logs from the protection detail I put on you 6 months ago." Penelope's breath hitched. "Protection detail?" "Leo wanted my empire," Vincent explained, his voice thick with a sudden, raw emotion. "He knew he couldn't kill me directly. My security is too tight. So he looked for a weakness. He found out that I came to this restaurant every Tuesday and Thursday, not for the food, but to watch you. He realized you were my blind spot." Vincent reached out, his fingers stopping an inch from her cheek, wanting to brush away the frozen tear but restraining himself. "They were going to kidnap you, Penelope. They were going to torture you, to force me to surrender the docks and the supply routes. I couldn't move you without tipping them off. So I created the bounty." "You made me the target," she whispered, the reality washing over her. "I made you the bait. But under my rules," he countered fiercely. "I offered 10 million to make you cry, with strict instructions that no one could physically harm you. It forced Leo and his men to abandon the assassination and kidnapping plots and try to play a psychological game instead. A game I knew they would lose, because I know how unbelievably strong you are." He finally closed the gap, letting his knuckles graze her cold cheek. "I used the bounty to draw out every traitor in my organization, one by one. I sat in that booth upstairs and watched them try to break you. And every man who disrespected you, every man who tried to hurt you, I crossed off my list. They are all gone, Penelope. Arthur, Tommy, the critics, the hitmen. Tonight, with Leo, the threat is completely neutralized. You are safe." Penelope stared at the most dangerous man in Chicago. He had turned her life into a living nightmare for nearly a month. He had caused her immense stress, cost her a sous chef, and brought violence to the doorstep of her sacred kitchen. But he had also shielded her from a brutal kidnapping. He had waged a shadow war in the streets of Chicago solely to keep her breathing. "You're a monster, Vincent," she said, her voice completely steady. "I know," he replied softly, not denying it. "I am a ruthless, violent man. I live in a world of blood. But you live in a world of sugar and fire. You create things. You bring light. I couldn't let my darkness swallow you, so I built a wall around you using the only tools I have, fear and money. Penelope took a step back, wrapping her arms around her shivering shoulders. The adrenaline was fading, and the freezing temperature of the walk-in was seeping into her bones. "So what now?" she asked, her teeth beginning to chatter. "The game is over. The rats are dead. Am I just supposed to go back to searing scallops and pretend the Mafia didn't just use my restaurant as a mousetrap?" Vincent reached into the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a heavy, thick envelope. He placed it on the stainless steel prep table between them. "What is that?" $10 million in bearer bonds, Vincent stated matter-of-factly. Penelope scoffed. "I didn't make myself cry, Vincent." "No," Vincent agreed. "But you endured. You stood your ground against the worst men this city has to offer, and you didn't flinch until the very end. You won the game, Penelope. The bounty is yours. Pay off your mother's medical debts. Buy Lumina from the restaurant group. Open 10 more restaurants. Take the money and leave Chicago if you never want to see my face again. I will ensure you're protected wherever you go." He looked at her, and for the first time, the formidable Mafia boss looked terrified. "But I am begging you to stay." Penelope looked at the envelope. $10 million. Total freedom. Total independence. She could buy Lumina tomorrow and answer to no one. She looked back at Vincent. He wasn't demanding her affection. He wasn't taking what he wanted by force. He was laying his empire at her feet and giving her the choice. She stepped forward, picking up the heavy envelope. She tapped it against her palm, tilting her head as she studied him. "You put a lot of miles on my floors this month, Costello," she said, a tiny, dangerous smirk playing at the corner of her lips. "And I don't appreciate having blood on my freezer tiles. It's an absolute nightmare for the health inspection." Vincent blinked, the whiplash of her tone catching him off guard. "I'll have Dominic bring the professional cleaning crew, hospital grade. Tonight." "Good." Penelope walked past him, heading toward the heavy steel door. She pushed the release handle, and the warm, ambient air of the kitchen rushed in to meet them. She paused in the doorway and looked over her shoulder. "You owe me a new sous chef, Vincent, and you owe me a peaceful dinner service. No more thugs. No more bounties. And if you ever want to sit in that private booth again, you will order the sea bass, medium rare, and you will eat it without complaining." Vincent's chest expanded as a deep, genuine laugh rumbled from his throat. The heavy burden of the past 6 months seemed to instantly evaporate. "Understood, chef." "And Vincent?" He stopped, his eyes locking onto hers. "Yes, Penelope?" "Tomorrow night, after service." Her gaze swept over his tailored suit, a spark of undeniable heat flashing in her eyes. "You're taking me on a real date, and you're paying." Vincent smiled, a predatory but completely devoted grin. "I wouldn't have it any other way." As Penelope walked back into her kitchen, tossing the $10 million envelope onto her desk like it was a stack of cheap napkins, she realized something profound. She had always known how to command a kitchen. Now, she commanded the most powerful man in the city. The trap had been sprung, the game was over, and somehow she had walked away with all the chips. Did you expect that explosive twist? Vincent Costello risked his entire empire to protect the woman he loved, turning a deadly bounty into the ultimate shield. If you loved this intense mafia romance story filled with mind games, alpha protectors, and fierce heroines, hit that like button right now. Don't forget to share this story with your friends who love a good plot twist, and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling, real-life drama stories. Drop a comment below. Would you have kept the $10 million